Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Vital Dissent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarlane. This one is episode 271, and the show notes may be found at vitaldissent.com/271. And in this episode, I'm going to be doing a read-along of my editorial that I put out this week at the Libertarian Institute. This one is entitled, as you can tell from the title of the episode, The Anti-Woke to Zionist Pipeline. So before we get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I thought this article needed to be written. But also, just on a personal note, I started homebrewing beer. And so we're going to be doing a little drink along here as we go through the article. So this is the first beer that I did as a homebrew, and it's actually like an Alaskan Amber clone. So I'm going to be featuring it here. I got another beer that's in the brewer right now, in the fermenter right now, that I've been tweeting about. If you follow me on Twitter at Pat _McFarlane. Pat McFarlane _ on Twitter there. So you can see it has like a nice amber color, decent head retention on it there. And so I'm really happy with it. It's a really excellent beer. And with homebrewed beer, you can really retain that yeast kind of taste, the active yeast, because it's not pasteurized or anything like that. So really do enjoy the hobby, and I'm going to keep it up. I got another like an Augustiner Helles clone in the fermenter right now that's just being worked on. So really happy with that. Yeah, really nice looking there. So all right, so I really thought that this article needed to be written. I think it was something that I noticed very early on in the October 7th timeline as it went forward. And I really noticed how quickly the narrative went from like Hamas is just like Black Lives Matter in the conservative right. So all these Zionists, as we know, have infiltrated the conservative media, and how Zionists are so active in the neoconservative sphere, that space, that a lot of them are Zionists and they are affected by the Israel lobby, right? So I noticed that narrative quickly spinning from, okay, well, how do we get American conservatives to care about what's happening in Israel? Well, we spoon feed them this narrative that we've been priming, and it seemed like all of a sudden this narrative came about, one that had been primed and ready to go, it seemed like, for quite some time. That, in a way, it almost seemed like the entire anti-woke narrative had been placed for conservatives to eat up, so that when the time came, they could quickly make this assumption. And I'm not saying that this is exactly the case, but this is what it felt like, right? That this narrative had been placed and so captured the conservative mind that it was such an easy transition, like switching a flip and installing the script after the October 7th attack to transition from, hey, Hamas is a left-wing operation. Hamas is just like Black Lives Matter in the United States, and anyone in the United States who protests what Israel is doing supports Hamas. They're not sticking up for the Palestinians. They're supporting Hamas explicitly, and that makes them akin to Black Lives Matter, and Hamas is the Middle Eastern Black Lives Matter. That's exactly how the narrative went. Oh, really good. So I felt like this article really needed to be written to document exactly how that happened and to kind of tease it apart. And the main inspiration that I got for this article was that I saw in our group chat, we have a group chat with a lot of the guys from the Libertarian Institute and a few friends of ours as well, and the antiwar.com guys. We were talking about this interview that happened where the lady from Libs of TikTok, she's actually the same age as me, very close. Chaya Raichik, her name is. And I had noticed how in January she was tweeting from Israel because she had taken some kind of a press tour of Israel, and she was tweeting from these atrocity sites, these so-called atrocity sites, and she was there with IDF soldiers, and you have to believe that the only way she would really have access to these sites would be if she was with the IDF, right? If they had given her a tour of these sites and told her exactly what happened there. And then, February 24th, there was an interview that was that was released where this Taylor Lorenz, the one who doxed Chaya Raichik as being the person behind Libs of TikTok. I don't know if you remember that 2 years ago in April of 22, where she had done this expose in the Washington Post talking about how she had found out who this private citizen was, Chaya Raichik, of Libs of TikTok, and found her personal details and doxed them over the internet. Or, sorry, doxed them in this article over the internet, rather. So on February 24th, which was like a couple weeks ago now, she released, Chaya Raichik granted her this interview. And of course, I hate both of these people. Like, both of these people I just cannot stand. And we'll get into why I can't stand Raichik in a minute here. I mean, she did do a press tour of Israel guided by the IDF, spewing all these like controverted and debunked atrocity propaganda stories that we've talked about here on the podcast. But I'll just do a read along here and pause to comment. So the article begins, and I'll put a link in the show notes page. It was published on Libertarian Institute. On February 24th, Chaya Raichik, creator of the famous social media brand Libs of TikTok, granted an interview to her nemesis, Washington Post columnist Taylor Lorenz. The clash was not the first between the two. In April 22, Lorenz published an expose doxing Raichik as the then anonymous creator behind Libs of TikTok. With this recent interview, Lorenz sought to denigrate Raichik's credibility as an icon of modern American conservatism. To this end, Lorenz was actually quite successful, albeit in a way that she was incapable of truly exploiting, given her credentials. And of course, her credentials is that she's a member of the corporate press. She's a columnist at the CIA Washington Post. She is like an establishment liberal, like a liberal Democrat. She's not a ultra progressive one, but I'm not like exactly an expert on who in the Democrats believes what exactly. Like, I do know that, or at least I assume that liberals, right? Liberals are like centrist Democrats and not progressives. And there's good progressives, in my opinion, and bad progressives. That that Lorenz is a member of like the liberal establishment. But in my opinion, the liberal establishment still accepts all of this crazy like transgender, gender affirming care kind of stuff, the LGBTQIA plus alphabet soup stuff. That's my understanding. But also, her position as being a member of the establishment. So when Lorenz asked Raichik about her support for the Great Replacement theory, she framed the question as follows. Now, of course, the Great Replacement theory is this idea that someone, probably the Democratic establishment, is encouraging immigration to the United States from the third world to replace the white race, essentially, or to replace, good tax-paying Americans who are here because of birthright, something like that. So she framed the question as follows, and I'm going to try and bring up the actual video here. I did timestamp them in the article.
How do you feel about that and your role in cultivating this fan base?
So
how does that make
I just
you
look at the
feel?
facts and then.
Okay,
here it is.
Does that not look like they're trying to replace us?
I guess sort of
They're
imagine
bringing in
America
a whole
as
new population.
a melting pot. Isn't that sort of what America was founded
No,
on?
but they're actually bringing in more people than are actually being born.
So I guess it sounds like you sort of do ascribe to this theory of the Great Replacement. How does that make
I just
you
look at the
feel?
facts and the numbers.
Well, so I mean, just let's give a corollary, right? A lot of Jewish people fled, Europe, came over here also as immigrants. And there's a lot of criticism towards Jewish people in those movements, in those far right movements. So I'm just wondering, as a Jewish woman, sort of how you feel about that and your role in cultivating this fan base that might think of you as a minority or an outsider.
Not all cultures are equal. Yeah.
So I know you have a lot of
Taylor Lorenz immediately changes the topic then, and I think that she should have pounced on that. Like, okay, well, I framed the question as being, well, a lot of right-wingers hate Jews. That's how Lorenz frames the question, because of course that's what she thinks. A lot of right-wingers hate Jews, and you're a Jew, so don't you think isn't there a disconnect there where you're talking about the Great Replacement theory, but you're one of the invaders, according to the Great Replacement theory? And Rachik's answer is so interesting, and that's why I included it in the article. She says, not all cultures are equal. Yeah, like really defiantly like that. And one has to wonder, like, okay, so is she saying that third world cultures are not equal to our American shared culture as like WASPs? Or is she saying that not all third world cultures and not all American white rural cultures are equal to her Jewish culture? That was really kind of ambiguous. I mean, I would assume that she's talking about all these cultures and saying, oh, well, the Ashkenazi Jew culture is the highest that there is, and the WASP culture is below that, and white rural conservative culture is below that. And then you have your other like deplorables like white progressives, and then you have, black people and Asians or whatever below them. And then you have, garbage from the third world that they're importing to try to replace us. I don't know what she's saying, right? I mean, of course, for our purposes and for purposes of my article, maybe I would just assume that she's saying, well, obviously Jews are like, my Jewish culture is better than others. I don't think she actually means that, but there is an interpretation that is plausible from what she said that could be it. So I continue the article. Lorenz fails to understand that the problem with Rachik is not that she is Jewish. It is that she's an agitator with dual loyalty. And of course, dual loyalty would be this idea that she has loyalty and fealty, one, to the United States as being an American, but also she obviously has loyalty to Israel because she feels compelled to go to Israel in its time of need and to use her journalistic platform to spew atrocity propaganda to lay the cover for what the UN courts, the ICJ, says is an ongoing plausible that it's a genocide. So she clearly has dual loyalty because that was done with the purpose of basically convincing the conservative part of the United States, her audience, to support Israel in its quest to exterminate or to remove the Palestinians from Gaza. Because that's what the purpose, what else would the purpose of that trip be? To lay cover to Israel's campaign. Now, whether I can't see into her heart. Did she think that, well, this is purely a defensive campaign that Israel is doing to preserve itself? Maybe that's what she believes. But the effect is that's not the reality of what's going on the ground. And that wasn't the reality, emphatically was not the reality of what was going on in January when she went there. Like many anti-woke figures, Rachik packages outrage pornography with Israel First activism. This weakens true conservatism by diverting finite political energy to both unproductive reactionism and support for Israel. So after I wrote this, Libs of TikTok was going on, Chaya Rachik was going on like a self-congratulatory spree because she identified that there was some kind of LGBTQ like bondage community center in Philadelphia or in John Fetterman's district. I think it's Pennsylvania. Is he a senator? That was receiving $1 million in grants in a new like spending bill. And she blew the whistle on that, and her blowing the whistle on that meant that the bill was stopped, or at least they were going to carve out that funding to that place, because it would be public funds going to like this S&M like sex. I mean, I actually visited the website and read the thing. It was this doesn't make it okay. It's still disgusting, but tax money going to this LGBTQ sex S&M place. Now it says in its policy that like no bodily fluids should be exchanged and no one should have sex, but it's a kink party, like it's a kink place. And her activism, I mean, I guess in some sense, to give credit where it's due, her activism stopped that. And Thomas Massey tweeted about it and how they were taking that out. And I think that's good. I think that's great, whatever. But the vast majority of what she does is to she basically, sometimes she just puts the video, like people say, like even on Joe Rogan, and I think Jimmy Dore said this in a recent episode, and it's whatever, it's not to call them out or anything like that, but it's not what she does is not just put videos up there for you to think and form your own conclusion. Maybe some people do that because, I mean, frankly, these wackos, like the wackos that she features really like expose themselves with their own stuff. She doesn't necessarily need to frame it, but what she does is that she puts it up there and she has a caption over the top. And she has been doing like these reports. She'll report and say what is happening like it's fact. And sometimes it's accurate, but sometimes it's not. And sometimes the framing is wrong. And sometimes it's purposefully inflammatory that the facts are not right. Sometimes it's accurate, you know, and I'm not saying like, I'm not trying to defend this or like belittle some of the sick shit that she puts up that people are doing in the United States, that schools are doing. I'm not trying to defend that or belittle it or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that all it is in the vast majority of cases is outrage pornography, that people, that boomers, that Gen X people in rural areas mostly watch libs of TikTok. They freak the fuck out about it, about what they see. They get disgusted and they go on these reactionary campaigns where all they do is go to these school meetings and they scream and holler, and sometimes it works, I don't know, and like sometimes there are changes that happen, but the vast majority of it is just people getting pissed off, getting cynical of the world, getting reactionary in a bad way, and not doing constructive things like actually getting on the school board, getting involved with their school, in ousting this disgusting progressive LGBTQ policy, that kind of stuff. And when I say that, I'm not talking about like, you know, something that would be considered more mainstream and productive from the left. I'm talking about like the stuff that is the sexualization of children, no matter how you slice and dice it, right? But what I'm saying, right, is the vast majority of this stuff is that kind of stuff. Just creating, like making people interact with her content, getting impressions and clicks and all that stuff, dressing it up as activism. And that's not to say that's all of what she does per se, but that's the majority of it. And also, oh yeah, you need to support Israel in their military campaign. And I'm going to go to Tel Aviv and I'm going to go to the West Bank and propagate all these atrocity stories that are not accurate, like a fair amount of my coverage, right? So by following the script of Rachik and her ilk, America Firsters may fail, among other things, to capitalize on what might be their biggest political opportunity in generations. The same Democratic leadership that is grooming our nation's youth is also openly abetting genocide. So I think this is a huge window that right-wingers should embrace, especially the America Firsters. But this is and this is a piece for another day, is that we had an anti-war right that was just nascent in this country after the war in Ukraine started. And people like Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, I wrote about this at the time, stood their ground, right? And they were starting to try to attack all of our, and they might still be doing this, trying to reduce our aid to Ukraine, bring us back from nuclear brinksmanship with Russia. But I think after that, the anti-war right just dissolved. And now it's like, okay, well, the anti-war right, the populist America First right, all of a sudden rallies around, their masters in Israel and rushes to support Israel. And how do the America Firsters, well, they oppose aid to Ukraine, but everyone is owned by Israel and everyone agrees that aid needs to go to Israel. So they definitely are going to get on board and pass these funding packages to go to Ukraine and Israel because one is conditional on the other, right? So, and the other thing about the anti-war right that used to exist before October 7th is that, primarily the reason why I believe this, the reason why they were opposed to more aid to Ukraine was because they wanted to step back from the brink with Russia so that we could focus everything on China and, now Israel, but focus on China. And it makes sense to have a rapprochement with Russia if we're going to eventually team up against Russia or against China together. Because again, remember the Sino-Soviet split that I've talked about on this show. So further back to the article, if Lorenz did not epitomize the corporate press, she could have exposed Raychik to her own supporters, to Raychik's supporters, by asking Raychik why she decided to team up with the Democrats in order to sell Israel's genocide to them. So again, if Raychik realized, if she was Patrick McFarlane or, I don't know, a right-winger, someone like Pete Quinones, who liked this article, by the way, maybe she could have pinned down Raychik and really got to the bottom of this. Like, okay, well, if you are so, and again, like the elephant in the room is that all this LGBTQ gender theory is saturated with Jewish scholars. And I think that, I don't know, maybe that is something that Raychik should answer for. I guess it depends on how much you believe that, are Jews in cahoots to bring about these things, right? I don't necessarily think so, but you do tend to notice, right, that there is a lot of Jewish thinkers behind all of these things. And maybe that's just because Jews are smart and they, come up with these theories like, anarcho-capitalism is mostly, Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. But it's a question that right-wingers, especially people who ascribe to the Great Replacement theory, and that's what that's what I'm saying is that people who follow Raychik, who believe these things, who are right-wingers, wouldn't they notice and want to pin down and like grill her? And if Taylor Lorenz was one of them, she might glob onto this. Well, LGBTQ, all these gender theories was created by Jews and you're a Zionist Jew. What do you think about that? And really nail down to it. And like I say, that's something that right-wingers in her audience that Lorenz is cueing on with her questions, that's something that they might notice that could be exposed by someone in a tough interview. And judging by Raychik's performance in this interview, she wouldn't have done very well. So indeed, I say Raychik departed on an IDF press tour of Israel on January 14th for the purpose of peddling fabricated Hamas atrocity pieces. During this trip, Raychik specifically claimed that Hamas mutilated babies, systematically weaponized rape, and incinerated dozens of vehicles fleeing the Nova Music Festival. Remember that? These stories were all disproven by Israeli sources prior to Raychik's arrival in Tel Aviv. So let me just go through the links here and provide the receipts. So here's she tweeted on January 14th with her passport on her way to Tel Aviv. And then here, she tweets about how she's by the Gaza Strip She talks about how terrorists breached the fence from this spot on October 7th and murdered over 45 people in the kibbutz and took a few dozen hostage. She spoke with a first responder who described butchered babies, mutilated women, and piles of dead bodies. Well, that first responder is from Zaka, right? Because that's where these stories came from. And we're going to talk about Zaka in a second. We did talk about Zaka on this show before. So if you want to hear about that, go back a few episodes. So mutilated babies, weaponized rape, right? Here's another one. I heard a firsthand account from a soldier who came to Kfar Aza on October 7th. He found a dead naked woman. She had blood dripping from between her legs. There was semen on her body. She was violently gang raped by Hamas terrorists, demonic, barbaric monsters. And how Hamas incinerated dozens of vehicles fleeing the Nova Music Festival. This is her there with her IDF handlers in the car graveyard where all of the vehicles from that, basically fleeing the music festival, the Nova Music Festival, were taken. Now, again, we went over all this in this podcast, but here's the Mondo Weiss report from January 3rd, which was 2 weeks before Chaya Raichik's visit to Israel, talking about how the family of, remember that report that was in New York Times, the Banner report that was made by an Israeli intelligence officer that had a prior Israeli Air Force intelligence officer who had no experience reporting at all before having the front page story in the New York Times, had no journalistic experience before then, was hired to do this Banner story on sexual violence by Hamas on October 7th. Mondo Weiss on January 3rd reported about how the family of the Banner woman for that story said that she wasn't sexually assaulted. And again, here's the story from Ynet that we talked about with Brad Pierce and all of his reporting on how Hamas was given the order to kill anything that moves, essentially on October 7th, which included incinerating all of these cars that were fleeing the Nova Music Festival. And this report came out on January 1st, 2 weeks before Chaya Raichik left for Tel Aviv. So further, Taylor Loren should have pounced when Raichik utterly failed to exhibit any depth of thought or insight into her anti-woke beliefs beyond base opposition to the sexualization and mutilation of children. After all, Raichik is perhaps the individual most responsible for inserting this issue into conservative discourse. I mean, I can think of some people who, like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh, who came out with that film, What is a Woman? Who has been kind of, responsible for it. But most people, like the whole groomer thing, I think that Chaya Raichik is individually responsible for that whole thing. I mean, bringing it to the tension of, at the same time, remember when Ron DeSantis was on about that in Florida. So I think that, and here's the receipts, right? The quote from the interview itself. She says she was asked and responded very unimpressive with her response. So here's the question. What happens when all of the
people living happy lives as trans people?
Well, first of all, the whole trans it's based on a lie. You can't change your gender.
Okay, but
so they could go live their life. I mean, I can't tell someone what to do in their house.
Sounds like you do want to tell people what to do in their house.
I never said that.
So you're totally okay with people being trans, just not as long as they're in public?
No, I never said that. They could. The whole thing is based off of a lie, and I think that this lie cannot be mainstream in our society. It's a lie.
And what harm is it causing, do you believe?
I like the truth. I like truth.
Right, but I'm saying what's the harm of people expressing their gender identity differently than you believe it to be? What harm are they causing?
Like I said, we are a nation of truth, and I seek the truth.
But I'm asking about the harm. What's the harm? You might believe it to be false, but what's
The harm is that there's a lie that is very mainstream and is being embedded into every institution.
So what the fuck is that answer? What is that answer? I mean, it sounds like Chaya Raichik has never been asked in an adversarial situation to explain her beliefs. And she is the person who is most responsible for this issue entering conservative discourse. What is that answer? What do you think that answer is? She was asked 3 times, what do you think the harm is that people are mutilating children? I mean, that wasn't the actual question, but in her mind, right? In her mind, all of this is responsible for child grooming and mutilating children, convincing them that they're transgender and convincing them to chop their breasts and their penises off and to get their vagina inverted, right? And to take the meat from their arm and make like a pseudo penis, right? She's asked 3 times to explain what the harm is of that in society. And it seems like her answer that she's never even fucking considered the question, right? And we're supposed to believe that she is the person. Like, she spends all day, every day finding these stories. She is probably so taken with this issue, like obsessively taken with this issue, that she spends almost all of her waking hours working on these stories. And she can't even sit down and answer a simple fucking basic question about it. Who is this person? I want to know who this fucking person is, right? I mean, do you believe that she's genuine with this? Do you believe those answers? I mean, that is so discrediting, like that this is the person that is leading this account that infuriates and probably causes high blood pressure in like half the conservative population in the country. It's just fucking absurd. I mean, excuse my language. I usually don't swear as much on this show, but God fucking damn it, dude. Raichik later stated, sorry about that. Raichik later stated, gender is actually made up by a child predator, a pedophile, but she did not provide any additional information. It was as if she watched this Matt Walsh video 3 years ago and quickly forgot the details, right? So is Chaya Raichik the person most responsible for bringing this, like talking about this issue and making people pissed off about it in the country? Or is she just like a stupid college idiot at a bar somewhere in an argument with her English major classmate who thinks that men can be women and women can be men, and that 40-year-old men can identify as a 13-year-old girl or some shit like that? That a man can like think that he's a chick and then dominate women's swimming, college women's swimming. Like, she sounds like she's never considered the question of what is the harm in society. Then she says, oh yeah, well, you know, gender is made up by a child predator.
So he made up gender, and now they conflate the two.
Construct.
Well, gender is actually made up.
Exactly. Yes, we agree on this. We agree.
By a child predator, by a pedophile.
We don't agree.
Yeah.
We don't agree on
so he made up gender, and now they conflate the two, and they use it to basically trans kids. So there are actually 2 sexes, and there are 0 genders, and there are many personalities.
So it sounds like she's never read a book on the subject. I mean, I'll leave it to you guys to make up your own conclusions about this, and I'd encourage you to watch the entire thing. But she's answering with platitudes, with like basic talking points that you would expect from, like, I don't know, your conservative mother-in-law or something at the Thanksgiving table, right? Not the person who is the leader of bringing this issue to the attention of the nation and pissing people off about it. Like, she sounds like she's never read a book about it. And here's the Matt Walsh video, by the way.
All right, now, it's taken as self-evident these days that something called gender exists and that it is distinct from biological sex. Gender constructs, and there is no better place.
This is where he's talking about the dude that she's referring to.
To start than a guy by the name of Dr. John Money. Was a prominent psychologist and sexologist. Money was one of the early pioneers of the gender theories that are currently taught in grade schools and universities.
So right, that is the person she's probably referring to, but she can't even like remember his name, right? He's the godfather of all this stuff. That Matt Walsh, like I have my problems with Matt Walsh that I talk about in this piece, but for fuck's sake, like that Matt Walsh has actually done the research on, right? Because I don't believe that he's a phony like I think that Rachik is. Or maybe either she's a phony or like she's just a very unimpressive person. So if opposing the sexualization of children is really Rachik's priority, why doesn't she criticize Israeli policy, right? After all, Israel is a safe haven for American pedophiles. And here's that story here, how Jewish American pedophiles hide from justice in Israel. There's a whole CBS like expose on it that came out a couple years ago, how Jewish American pedophiles flee to Israel to avoid extradition and to avoid charges in the United States. So I'd encourage you, like, I've never heard her talk about that and criticize Israel, which, by the way, Israel has its own LGBTQ problems, right? If you view that as a problem. I also talked about, she makes fun of Taylor Lorenz for wearing a mask in 2024 during the interview, which you can see her doing as a virtue signal, right? Well, Israel is the most vaccinated country in the entire world, right? I mean, that was a whole thing during COVID. Did Chaya Ratchik talk about that during COVID-19? I don't know. Like, I didn't search her tweets to see if she addressed that at all. But furthermore, these atrocity stories that Chaya Ratchik championed herself, and here's an example. I already I linked to that previously, but they were sourced from Zaka. And here's the story about Zaka. We talked about it with Brad Pierce in an article. Remember Yehuda Meshi Zahav? Remember him? Well, he started Zaka, the civil relief service of first responders, quote unquote. Remember, Rachik tweeted about that, but these stories that she's referring to actually were sourced from Zaka. We talked about that with Brad specifically, and how the Gray Zone also reported on that with Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate. And Yehuda Meshi Zahav was a serial pedophile, a serial child sex abuser, according to this expose from either Haaretz investigation. Israel Prize winner, Zaka founder, sexually assaulted boys, girls, and women, Haaretz investigation reveals, over a period of decades. So I don't know, why is that not a foundation issue for the credibility of this organization that she's sourcing things from? And furthermore, I mean, if it's not, I mean, it doesn't exactly directly disprove what these people are saying and testifying to, but don't you think that, like, it would be a problem for her, seeing as that she's so against pedophilia? So Taylor Lorenz notwithstanding, it is critically important to oppose the sexualization of children. But why must this opposition be wrapped in Zionism and delivered to Americans with incendiary zeal? Now, I don't have an issue with Jews. I'm not someone who like throws the JQ around. I'm against Zionism. I'm against the state of Israel. And there are tons we've talked about this on the show, but there's tons of Jews, especially Orthodox Jews. Sheldon Richman, he's not an Orthodox Jew, but he's an example of, and he talks about this in his book and in interviews, his book Coming to Palestine, which is now an audiobook, by the way, for the first time. He talks about it growing up in his Jewish family, how I think it was his grandfather would not support the state of Israel because how I don't know, how hubristic is it to think that humans can bring about, by their own will, bring about the Jews coming back to the Holy Land. And basically, how could, first off, Judaism is a faith and it's not a people. From what I understand, anyone can be a Jew according to these Orthodox Jews. Like, it's a faith. It's not a unified people in a unified country. It transcends borders. And furthermore, how hubristic and self-centered is it to think, and blasphemous is it to think, that humans of their own will and accord could bring about the end days, could bring about of their own doing the second coming of Christ, is folly. So the whole Zionist project is an attempt to do that, essentially. And that's opposed by so many God-fearing Orthodox Jews. So why does the resulting outrage from, everything pushed by these anti-wokesters always wedge the populist right away from areas of potential agreement with the working class left? Mainly like refusing to put Israel first, or refusing to hold banksters accountable. Or holding banksters accountable. So like refusing to put Israel first, or the issue of agreement that is, we need to hold these banksters accountable. Of course, we know the answer. It's American public opinion is crucial to Israel. According to former Israeli Deputy National Security Advisor Charles Freilich, quote, America is the be-all and end-all of most policy deliberations in Israeli national security decision-making forums. Correspondingly, the Zionist infiltration of American politics is nothing new. So I just quoted, I linked a few things. I linked to AIPAC, because Justin Raimondo did that in a column that I covered a couple things ago. But also the Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy by John Mearsheimer, which I have a copy on my shelf, by the way. And then I linked to the ADL, and these hyperlinks sometimes like throw people off, but here's Reclaiming the American Right, because that's exactly what I'm referring to, Justin Raimondo's book. So in the last 15 or so years, a new generation of conservative influencers has emerged, mostly coalescing around opposition to political correctness on college campuses. Now, think inter alia, among others, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Jordan Peterson, Laura Loomer, Che Arachik, and Matt Walsh. Now, you could think of tons more people. I mean, Milo Yiannopoulos was in the before times. But their largest publications include The Blaze, The Daily Wire, and The Post Millennial. Jack Posobiec is one person I was going to cite in here too. So in the days following October 7th, these commentators began spewing Israeli propaganda as if hit with an activation phrase, right? Now, I'm not saying that they were hit with an activation phrase, but would it look any different if they were, right? The method these commentators use to rally right-wingers for Israel should be familiar to any parent. It's the same method that you use to introduce infants to solid food. You mix breast milk in with rice cereal or some other thing, like applesauce, so it's familiar, palatable, and does not disrupt digestion. So, yeah, right now we're introducing my 7-month-old to solid food. So that's what made me think of this kind of analogy or comparison. But for these right-wingers, the narrative was simple. This is what they spoon-fed to American conservatives. Supporting Palestine is equating supporting Palestine to supporting Hamas. And supporting Hamas basically means that you support Black Lives Matter. That's how it was. That, all these left-wingers, these progressives out in the streets, they are essentially the same thing. They're basically supporting Hamas. Just like they did with Black Lives Matter, they're supporting Hamas. And here's a bunch of tweets to confirm that. Matt Walsh says, if you're on the right and sympathizing with Hamas, it should concern you that you're on the same side as the radical left, Black Lives Matter, trans activists, open borders advocates, and every other type of anti-white, anti-Christian, left-wing militant who wants you and your family dead. That was October 11th of 2023. Here's Mike Cernovich on October 7th, 2023. AOC-supported Marxist group is holding a rally in light of the Hamas attacks. They advise members to mask up. Will there be Hamas members in attendance? Will they attack Americans tomorrow? So again, AOC and these Marxist groups are Hamas. And basically, if you're on their side, you're on their side if you think that Israel shouldn't commit a genocide. And of course, at that period of time, it wasn't like, it wasn't like Israel was doing exactly what they're doing right now. But it continued. And I talk about later, essentially, this provided cover for the overwhelming Israeli response. Libs of TikTok quotes this tweet by End Wokeness, which is another major like Twitter account on this side. New statement: BLM grassroots calls for Hamas-style decolonization of America. So Black Lives Matter group says, we stand in solidarity. And notice how everything that they say doesn't mention Hamas. So all these things that these right-wing influencers actually cited, the vast majority of it did not say that, hey, we're coming out to support Hamas. They said, we're coming out to stand in solidarity with our Palestinian family. And that's what this says. Libs of TikTok tweets on October 10th. Imagine justifying the raping and murder of women, babies being beheaded, children burned alive, and over 900 innocent people murdered because decolonization. Now just imagine what else they would do in the name of decolonization. So I'm going to see if this plays, and let's see what this person actually, this thinning, purple-haired person actually said.
I can't stop thinking about the way that colonization is in its reckoning period across so much of West Africa and Central Africa. We're seeing coups and we're seeing uprisings. And, I'm not an expert on the politics of Israel and Palestine, but it is also deeply unsurprising to me seeing what's happening in Palestine. Because everyone is acting, like some people are acting confused, and the instinct here, given the complexity, is to see things in terms of this is horrific, what's happened to Israel. But when you all examined colonization and decolonizing, what did you actually think that would look like? Like, for real, it is so interesting watching people comment on this. And it's like this visual struggle of respectability politics and the way that there should be a diplomatic solution. And when you are violently oppressed for that long, what do you think the uprising against your oppressors looks like? And I say this as a white person living in colonized Australia on stolen land. Like, some of you all need a bit of a reality check, I think. Because, what did you think was going to happen? What did you think breaking free of colonial oppressors' chains looked like? Anyway, can't stop thinking about it.
Okay, so I don't think that was the most articulate way to make the point. I don't think it was as stupid as Libs of TikTok suggests. I think it would have been better to say okay, the way that Scott, because he actually knows something about this, as this person admits that they don't really know or are not familiar with, and I wouldn't phrase it in terms of colonizers and colonized. That's just not the way that I go about things with, we're libertarians. We believe in property rights and non-aggression. But Scott putting it together and saying this was a prison break, essentially what it was. And prison breaks aren't pretty, right? But that's what it is. If this person was familiar with the history and would know that the Gaza Strip is basically an enclave that is that there's borders on every side, right? Like Jack Lloyd would say, oh, it's just very strong borders, right? Well, people in Gaza are so bordered that they're besieged and they can't leave this small strip of land. Like if they go with fishing ships too far out in the ocean, they will be shot. If they approach the border fence, they will be shot. You can't, now there are passes, but the passes to leave are controlled. That there were studies done to basically see how to examine the caloric intake of every Palestinian to make sure that it wasn't too much. Right now, the defense that I've heard is, well, these studies were never actually implemented, and that policy wasn't implemented. Now, I don't know enough about it to get into it, but there were studies done about what is the bare minimum of caloric intake of food that we can allow into Gaza to make sure that these people aren't too prosperous, but at the same time, not starve them to death. And now we're seeing them starve to death. So anyways, I could go on forever about these tweets, but Jordan B. Peterson, you know how you can tell that Hamas is corrupt beyond redemption? Because the socialists in the West support them. That's you, AOC. Now there's blood on your hands. And he quotes Ben Shapiro saying, raping, mutilating, kidnapping, all of these are war crimes. So is hiding behind civilians. Every ounce of blood spilled in Gaza is on Hamas and its Iranian paymasters, every single ounce. So this was October 9th of 23. So you can see this narrative coming wholesale. Now, Ben Shapiro did an entire hour and 4-minute long episode on, he titled it Hamas is Here. And the whole point of it is to say that, oh, if you're out rallying, right? Now, rallies have been taking place across the entire planet, not just in the United States. I guess everyone on the entire earth who's coming out rallying in support of the Palestinian civilians, the innocent Palestinian civilians who are being killed, I guess they're all supporting Hamas and are 100% approving of what happened on October 7th. So it's the equation of the two that came from everywhere. Glenn Beck says that if you're out supporting, he says here, I'll just read it so there's no like editorialization. He says, shameful. However, it happens that last time the world was preparing for war, Hamas today are the same as Nazis in Madison Square Garden. Those who love government control and Marx also always seem to hate Jews. Germany last time, this time it will be led by Iran. So, I mean, just off the bat, sure, there were American Nazis in the American Bund who supported, they were Hitler-loving Nazis, right? But he equates, Hamas today is the same as Nazis in Madison Square Garden, right? Well, isn't Hamas like a left-wing militant group? That's what Ben Shapiro says. Those who love full government control and Marx also always seem to hate Jews. Well, wasn't Karl Marx a Jew? I'm actually not sure about that. I believe Karl Marx was a Jew. Let's see. Yeah, Marx's family was originally non-religious Jewish, but had converted formally to Christianity before his birth. His grandfather was a Dutch rabbi. So maybe he was, personally, maybe he was secular. I don't really know, but he is Jewish by like I don't know what it is. Ethnicity, what do you call it? At any rate, Karl Marx and communism are different than Nazism. I mean, like, I know we talk about the horseshoe theory, but it's not the same exactly. At any rate, Julio Rosas, chance of free Palestine, and from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free in Times Square. That's what Glenn Beck was quote tweeting, comparing these people in Times Square, saying free Palestine, resistance against occupation is a human right are some of the signs. But essentially, there's people holding up peace fingers, right? So, I mean, and again, I've talked about on this show that, like, I can understand, like, if you frame it in terms of, and I don't condone the killing of civilians in any situation at all, but you're not hearing the entire full spectrum of what happened without that framing of a prison break, right? And resisting against occupation is like, that is defense of property and persons and property, which is okay according to libertarian theory. So if you're an entire population that is enslaved, basically imprisoned in an open air concentration camp where your movement is restricted to a geographic area, would be aggression for someone to keep you there against your will. So going forward, in the early days of the conflict, this narrative, and that's, keeping those people there in that area against their will is not like the be all end all of the story too. There were so many things that happened before that to reduce them, like expelling people from their land to put them into that situation. And that's not in the ancient past either. That happened not very long ago. So in the early days of the conflict, this narrative, the narrative that that supporting Palestine is supporting Hamas, and that Americans who do that are the left-wingers who are also Hamas, supporting Hamas. This narrative provided cover for the overwhelmingly disproportionate Israeli response that followed, which to date has killed over 25,000 women and children, according to President Joe Biden and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Now, I believe the officially, the accepted number is that 13,000 of the people killed were women and children, or more than that. But the actual quote from Lloyd Austin was over 25,000 women and children have been killed. Now, people will say, oh, well, that came from the Palestinian health authorities. Well, that is the internationally accepted number, and you have Joe Biden and Lloyd Austin citing it as if they're accepting it's true. And you have to think that the U.S. military has a number that they've been keeping track of. So if conservatives care about putting Americans' needs first, they should ask why they should care about Israel. What has Israel ever done for us? And assuming those reasons are valid, why should we even care about the boilerplate reasons of mutual security, trade, and shared values? Mutual security. And I quoted to an article in the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, citing the reasons why Americans should care about Israel and what Israel has done for us. And it says it's based on tangible, steadily increasing security and economic interests, and not just shared values. So those are the three things that Foreign Affairs, this article printed in Foreign Affairs, cited as being the reason why we're friends with Israel. It's entitled Friends with Benefits: Why the U.S.-Israeli Alliance is Good for America. Printed in 2012. Why should people in my town of 8,000 give two shits about Israel and what Israel has done for us? Why? What has Israel done for us? And why should we care that it helps our security in the Middle East? Because it certainly doesn't help keeping us safer at home. And in fact, if you really want to assume that Americans should care about American positions in the Middle East for anything aside from oil prices, which we could achieve without dominating that area, why don't we talk about what kind of tripwires that Israel, a security guarantee to Israel presents, or having our soldiers in Israel, or the tripwires of, oh, well, why were we attacked from the clear blue sky on 9/11, right? Could it have been our support for Israel? Could it have been the treatment of the Palestinians? No, it couldn't have been that. It couldn't have been those things, right? I mean, Jesus Christ. In trade, I don't know exactly what beneficial trade we're getting from Israel. I mean, if you talk about mutually beneficial situations, why don't we talk about our mutually beneficial trade relationship with China? If trade is a reason for being friends with someone and for, sending them billions of dollars a year in military aid, why don't we send China billions of dollars in military aid every year? Because we certainly take advantage of China by buying their cheap consumer goods and giving them bullshit guarantees, right? So if trade is a reason to be friends with someone, why aren't we friends with China, right? And isn't our benefit from our relationship with China leagues better than whatever we get from Israel. In shared values, well, Max Blumenthal wrote this book called Goliath, talking about how Israel is not a democracy. It's not a shining beacon of liberty, that the entire place is essentially ruled by the right wingers, that there only exists the right wing in that country, that it's Israeli fascists, Zionist fascism, and that essentially they've outlawed dissent. They've outlawed, excuse me, they can randomly stop you. The Bill of Rights doesn't exist there. If you protest the war, the treatment of the Palestinians, that's an arrestable offense. You can't teach children about the Nakba and teach them what happened there. So all those things, especially not allowing public anti-war demonstrations is incredibly non-democratic, right? In quotes, if you care about that. So someday history, this is my, in closing here, someday history will ask how our country aided and abetted Israel in the crime of genocide, even as we watched it unfold in real time. And again, genocide is something that the ICJ has ruled is plausible. So as it becomes more and more clear that Israel is indeed inflicting the crime of crimes, average right-wingers should gnaw themselves off of Israel's leash. Doing so, they can finally embrace the political golden ticket that has fallen right into their laps. The very same Democrats that are grooming our children are abetting genocide. So there you go. That's my piece. So I think a lot of people liked it. I think it had a really good reception. It was incredibly difficult to write because I didn't know exactly how to go about it and to draw this connection between what is the problem with Raychick? Why is it, the problem with her and getting this straight in my head is that I have to establish that she's a phony right-winger. And how is that related to what she said in the interview? And how do I bring in what actually is happening is this transition from, well, we hate anti-woke, we're all anti-woke, we hate the woke movement. Oh, well, we're going to employ intellectual judo against you and flip you into being well, what do you hate the most? Oh yeah, it's the woke shit. Well, Israel's being attacked by wokesters. Oh, no. The wokesters here all support the Palestinians. So therefore, Black Lives Matter was violent in 2020. So they're supporting Hamas. And all those college kids on campus all support Hamas. And therefore, Israel should do whatever the fuck it wants. And we can't make any question about it when Israel flattens Gaza, destroys 70% of the buildings in the strip, and completely starves everyone over there now that their children are dropping dead and they're bombing the fuck out of everybody and civilians don't matter. And it's all Hamas's fault because they have human shields. And, never mind that we're pulling the trigger. It's Hamas that is keeping everyone there, and therefore, it's their fault, and we're completely blameless in this, and we're just defending ourselves. So at any rate, I put this out. I really, really would like to. I know it's been a difficult, I know I've told you that it's been a difficult fall and winter for me with, the new baby and with work and all that stuff. I'm really trying to work hard on putting out more content. My goal is, and I've thought about this a lot, is that in the past, I have this problem, and maybe if you've followed me for a long time, I have this problem where I get really excited and animated about something, especially I go through these waves with the podcast and the show and the Institute where I'll be all manic. It's like a bipolar thing where I'll be all manic and I'll be active and I'll put out an email a day for a number of weeks. And then I burn myself out. And then I go into dormancy for a while. And it really bugs me how I do that. And I think that if I just bit off less and spaced it out more, I would be much more prolific. So the last email I put out on my email list was in October 19th, when I gave an update on Oppenheimer. And then shit just got real from November, the holiday season, November, December. And then I went to visit my in-laws the first week in January, and then we all got influenza A, and we were basically sick until the beginning of February. And then until February happened, I started getting back into doing the show again, because I was like basically on hiatus from October until the end of January. And then just February picked up and I started putting out a show almost like every week and a half or something like that, every 10 days or so. This was my first column that I put out since, I don't know, October, something like that. And I really want to finish Oppenheimer Part 2. And it's been really hard to work on it in this time. Because all the while I've been a practicing lawyer. And with a new baby and 2 older kids, and it's just been insane. And the email list is so important to me and what I do, and making this a sustainable, like, actual source of income that I can justify putting my time into for my family's sake. So my new goal is this, and I want you to help me stay on track with it. I want to put out Oppenheimer Part 2, and I want to do it before June or July. And I want to write 1 column a week, or at least 1 column every 2 weeks. And I think that would be good to put that out, because columns really get attention when they're good. And I want to put out an episode, that can lag a little bit, but I want to put out an episode like every week and a half at the, like once every 2 weeks at the absolute latest. So more content, maybe put out an email, because I know Brad Pierce puts out a Substack once a week, and he's been really successful with it, I think. So if I put out an email once a week, put out a column once a week, and then put out an episode once every 10 days or so, the columns make for easy episodes, actually. You do all the heavy lifting there, and then get done with Oppenheimer Part 2. And I want to be done with Oppenheimer, to be honest. It's been a couple years that I've been working on the project, and I'm just kind of sick of it, to be honest. But Part 1 got the biggest reception of anything I've ever done. So it would behoove me to finish that. But there's so many other things I would like to make really interesting content about, like that, in the same style. So if you want to be a part of that, head on over to libertyweekly.club is my membership website. Sign up. You can go to subscribe in the lower right-hand corner. You can sign up for free to get my free content and emails. But if you become a premium member, you can support this content. I have benefits for you, like early access. I do want to do bonus episodes, but also I'm going to put your name on Oppenheimer Part 2 in the credits. That's going to be a big goal of mine, to thank all of you for hanging in there with me and supporting me through all this time financially. I really appreciate it. Memberships are $5 a month or $55 a year. And really good way to get a more intimate look at what I'm doing. I'm a little more personal on there and write some stuff. And I just really appreciate it. So libertyweekly.club, head on over there. vitaldescent.com/271, and libertarianinstitute.org is where you can catch all my stuff. So we will catch you next time. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope you like this article. Peace.